Malcolm McLaren has had a blazing career since the early 70s that has spanned fashion, music, film, television, and perhaps most importantly, publicity. Starting with his clothing shop Sex with Vivienne Westwood, followed by his founding of the infamous punk band the Sex Pistols, and soon after by a string of his own genre-hopping music releases, a tendency toward provocation became apparent. McLaren's projects take off spectacularly due to his undying enthusiasm for culture, but then, just as the public catches a glimpse of the idea, he jumps clear and seems to relish in watching it all fall apart. This hit-and-run attitude has left behind what many in the media might consider to be a string of failures, and yet the influence of his work is hard to miss. From the look and attitude of punk rock, much of which came from him, to his early music experiments on records like Duck Rock in what we would now call mashups. McLaren's position as the idea man of punk and some of his more outrageous pronouncements have made him a controversial figure. But much has been written from the tired old Malcolm as charlatan punk self-promoter point of view, so we thought we'd invite him here to tell his story his way. Malcolm, it's a really beautiful day out there, so I thought we'd just take a walk across the meadow.
Okie dokie, have a go.
There seems to be an old wisdom about artists that if they just keep doing what they're doing long enough, the public will eventually take notice and they'll find some kind of success. But you seem to like to grab the public's attention with one idea, only to turn it about face with the next. I guess I'm looking for a sort of thread that weaves together all the different disparate projects that you've undertaken.
Well, back in London, at the dawn of the 1960s, I entered art school. And the first lecture of the day was given to us by a goatee-bearded old corduroy-dressed painter. And he looked at us and said, So you think you're going to be successful painters, sculptors? He said, well, no, you're all going to bloody fail. And then we thought, oh my God, I've only been in the school a half an hour. He said, remember, any kind of benign success was never worth having. Much, much better, he said, to fail magnificently. And with that thought, I was off into the big wide world to open a shop on the King's Road in Chelsea. A hole in the wall. A place where I had to learn how to sell things. A normal person. I would make the most uncommercial clothes. I would sell rags. I would sell clothes that were impossible to wear, impossible to walk in. My partner at the time, Vivienne Westwood, my friends, Jamie Reed, together we created all the ransom note lettering and various posters and graphics that leaned upon a lot of ideas that ran out of Paris in 1968, members of cultural subversive groups such as the Situationists. You know, we were all very conscious of the world becoming one vast planet of commodity makers and a world that was soon to become bereft of ideas. And we created a revolutionary state of mind, something that we had to defend at all costs. In doing so, I caused a rumpus by creating a gang of like-minded creatures, younger than myself, assassins, sexy young assassins, and I called them the Sex Pistols. They had, virtually by their look, left the real world and started another, one that was full of dreams and possibilities. Nothing seemed impossible anymore. And this set me off in the world where I could now act as a grand mismanager of events carefully constructed to create all the necessary chaos. We broke those barriers. We never worried about what was cool. We were very concerned to make what was uncool our absolute domain and made that uncool world incredibly noisy. I don't deny we had to do some incredibly dastardly things, but we did get there. And the ramifications are being still felt today. The Sex Pistols was indeed a magnificent failure. I think the old boy with the goatee beard who lectured me in art school would have been very proud of that. He said, we should never look at ourselves as commodity makers, but we should look at ourselves as idea brokers. most of the world we live in today is a world of artifice, and a world in which we're never quite sure anybody's for real, because no one would take responsibility for any of their performances. You know, when their performance ends, it's no longer a commitment. Everybody's out to be merely cool. Whatever's decidedly cool is what everybody tries to be. People don't keep their passion for very long, so it's very difficult for any of us to understand what do people really believe in. So it's like karaoke in that respect. You see, the cool world became acceptable simply because the cool world was fashion, and fashion is utterly disposable. And what is very interesting now, I find, there's a new world emerging out of this karaoke world that I'm suddenly beginning to care about. And how interesting is it in that world where you get kids who, with 2 feet firmly placed in the 21st century, are able to imbue that world with all their passion and obsessions and turn it into a world we can now care about. A world that seemingly can have more integrity than supposedly the physical world, which we've now decided is horrific. Simply karaoke, artificial, and a world that we feel is bereft of any real passion. A world that is simply there to sell you things. The great thing about the web is you can drift through it, find out any form of information you want for free. There's something about the web that says it doesn't have to sell you anything. So the virtual world becomes a more comfortable world, a world where that outlaw spirit can exist, and a world where you can absolutely continue to have magnificent failures. A world where you can in truth become an artist again. A world in which the pre-teen generation are fast becoming Martians, amongst their older tranquilized earthling pals. It's a world which they can hack into all known aspects of the commodified world, seizing the technology for themselves and turning it into art. Quite a religious quest if you think about all these obsessive kids hacking away into antique technology and creating music from it. Converting old Ataris and Commodore 64s and even Game Boys into music-making machines, and in doing so expressing themselves with the bleeps and bloops into some strange language that ultimately starts to have a soul that hitherto before you never thought possible. Here, the corporate video game industry is suddenly being infected by rock and roll hooligans, and before we know it, we may have discovered that the intellectual vanguard is under 13. Can you imagine a world in which 13-year-olds are in control?
Actually, yes, I can kind of imagine that. The guy in the rocks over there who just took a shot at us is John Pavlis. He's here to write an article for Wired magazine. Oh, sorry, John.
This is the real true story of rock and roll. It was not about anything other than how to live your life as a gangster in sartorial splendor and turning the world into a place where normality would never return again.